So now you can see that I'm a little bit more than Jackie's husband, right? But just follow the director of lab school. We are really lab school parents, hardly pretty much growing up in this school. And also, I want to point out that I remember in the first conversation when I arrived at Hopkins philosophy department, the department chair told me that, do you know who graduated from the same program that you're now getting? I said, who? He said, John Dewey. So our graduate students' lounge is Dewey's room. So we're supposed to be active there. And then he said, he visited China and he has quite a few Chinese students. So why don't you think about maybe pragmatism as your future kind of a branch of philosophy to study? I kept that in mind, okay? So, but it turned out to be, I'm interested in studying philosophy of family, and actually that is the topic that today I'm going to talk about. Because when Ina asked me to do this kind of short talk, I thought about what to talk about, right? I'm a philosopher, and everybody knows that the Chinese philosophy has this kind of big name called Confucianism, right? So I need to give you just one thing of a little flavor of what the Confucianism, tastes like, right? And in combination with my philosophy of family, in combination with my background, there's some connections with Dewey, and with my background as, after all, I'm a spouse of Erikson, right? So I choose this one word, which I made it. Okay, English words does not have it. If you punch it into the computer, you get a red underline. That kind of red underline, wrong spelling word I'm trying to advocate is called familization, okay? And how do you understand? If you understand two other words which are pretty familiar, then you can get the sense. Individualization and socialization, are they the two concepts or principles or missions of our education, right? So I checked out many missions of schools would read something like this, that the mission of our school is to educate our kids to be all-rounded individuals and responsible members of a society, something like that. So I just came back from a series of talk in China, and there I'm trying to promote, the so-called individualization, socialization, which is actually the weaker part, or at least the weaker in tradition in the Chinese educational tradition. But here in US, in lab, I'm going to promote another thing, okay, that is a Confucian tradition in education, which I shall call familization. Now, why familization is important, and why familization has anything to do with early childhood, right? I think, most people here probably just by your instinct you understand it, right? Familization, by the simplest definition, would mean to make a family like one, okay? And it could then further divide it into a few constituencies kind of a definition. Say, for example, according to Confucius, let me quote, okay? Father needs to behave like a father, and the son needs to behave like son, which eventually means that for each and every family role name, every family needs to spell out a small set of obligations. So I remember once upon a time I asked my students, what does it take to be a son? Then my students, well, just to be born to your parents, right? The familization or the Confucian's idea about education means more than that, okay? Say, for example, if you're 2-year-old, okay, you're a good son just giving your parents a happy smiling, Okay, that would be good enough. But by 12, probably no, right? A smiling, that's just to, the first thing, and the list is go much, much longer than that. Say, for example, you need to bring back some grade reports, which, in China, you have to know that many parents don't recognize any other grades except for what? For A, right? So if you got a C and a D bring back, you're not a good son anymore. Then 22, how about 22? 22, you better bring home a very beautiful, very cultivated, and admirable what? Girlfriend, right? So that, make the parents like, oh, well, yeah, you are doing. Oh, yeah. So, see, the mother is already very happy. I mean, I don't know whether or not he brings home that one yet, okay? But by the age of 32, also remember, okay? That's not enough anymore. Just like at 2-year-old, you're kind of smiling now. Good grades, smile, and a good girlfriend. By 32, you need to bring back some lovely grandchildren. Yes, someone already tested. So point is, just to be a son is a very hard job to do, I mean, at least according to Confucius, that kind of familization, okay? To make a family like family means that many family could be just bearing an empty name without making much of the effort to make a family. And actually, according to so many research, I don't have to cite any concrete one, right? A smooth, stable, harmonious family is like the most important environment for any child, any baby to be born into and growing up. Everybody knows here. I would assume that nobody would argue against me, even though that, right? Philosopher argues, right? And so familization could be, in other words, let me repeat, okay, could be divided into series of definitions that how to be a daughter and how to be a son, right? And who is going to define it? You have to ask the mother and the father to define what the good son and good daughter to be, okay? And then the same thing. If you want to ask how to be a good father and mother, you better ask the children to define it. So, in other words, all those kind of roles, all the definitions, all the effort to try to honor or rectify those names requires many sides, not only, just the individual side kind of effort, but actually collaborative, kind of even dialectic kind of effort. So that, okay, well, you know what? I am a father, but I'm getting better. Isn't it my honey, right? Then, the husband and the wife, everybody has bared lots of family role names. And each one of them, assumes a small set of obligations. So trying to balance them is already hard enough a job, okay? So I'm trying to explain this for what, right? And I remember that a few years ago, a couple of my colleagues asked me to explain why, they are not talking about the early childhood education, right? I find myself recently talking about early childhood so much, right? Because of that lady over there. But actually, education involves more than early childhood. So my colleagues asked me that, recently there's a so-called PISA test, the Program International Students Assessment of OECD, where they have, every 3 years, they kind of organize thousands of students from 70 countries, right, to get into the same test, or same contents of science, math, and language, right? And they try to use exactly the same kind of problem to test worldwide, right? To see which country kind of in the secondary education they are doing well. And my colleagues noticed that throughout of those years that some of the Eastern Asian areas are pretty much stably stayed in the ranking relatively high. And they said, why, right? And I tried to study that very hard and find out I cannot say that it is because of Chinese or Japanese school system is good, okay? If their school system is good, then why, some of those parents or children, they immigrated to the United States. They're out of their school, but they come to here, and they're still doing pretty the same kind of thing. So, long story short, I find out that the contribution to those children, 15-year-old, pretty well in school, are mainly because of two things. Number one, their parents support extra protection and extra support, okay? That's number one. Number two, usually these parents, based on their extra support and extra protection, they are much more demanding. So they put a lot of pressure on their children, right? So generally speaking, I'm not sure about whether or not that's, as a holistic point of view, that's a kind of a right direction to go or not. But my explanation of that, at least for a 15-year-old doing well in in Korea, in Japan, and in Chinese-speaking world, is pretty much because of the familization. Okay, so I've been talking around, right, throughout East Asia, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in Japan, and in China, and usually people over there. They will say, well, our school is good too. But just one thing that our graduate school, our college education are not as good as the, let's say, United States or United Kingdom, okay? So what I'm trying to say is this. I mean, for the assessment, for evaluation, you can do whatever. Many, many things are, I think many doors are open, okay? And you absolutely have to see the downside of those Confucianism kind of familization. But I would say that Confucianism is just as a long historical tradition of education as the Socratic, Plato, and Aristotle in ancient Greek. So if we want to understand it, if we want to know what is it that they are good at, right? And I would say, of course, I'm a philosopher of family, right? I'm a little biased, but my shortest explanation is familization. Thank you.